Hey, well, welcome to week number 5, chapter 5 of our study through Rediscover Church. We're just a little over halfway through. There's 9 chapters, so after this week we'll have 4 chapters left. I hope you are being challenged by this, like a lot of us are in the groups that are meeting. Remember, we have groups meeting at 10 o'clock on Tuesdays and 6 o'clock on Wednesdays if you'd like to do, if your schedule allows for in-person discussion. Also, you'll find in the show notes at the bottom of the YouTube video, you'll find a link to the discussion questions on that chapter that you can help you walk through and kind of dialogue with that chapter to think a little deeper. Chapter 5 dealt a lot with is joining church actually necessary? And because what does it do? What do I get out of joining a church? And our answers this week have been a lot of things. We get fellowship, we get togetherness, we get a feeling of belonging. But he began this chapter talking about authority, right? That the church has authority as to the who and the what of the gospel. And that plays itself out in the ordinances we do. And as Baptists, we hold to these 2 ordinances of the church: baptism and the Lord's Supper. Those 2 things that we hold dear. It's kind of distinctive. There's not I don't know that there's any place outside of a local congregation that do baptism and the Lord's Supper. Really, there's not a reason to, right? Because those are things that are unique to the church. And so he talked a lot about, right, that church membership comes with, it puts you under the authority of the church. I want to read from page 75. And so this is what it says. Church membership is how we formally recognize and commit to one another as believers. It is a thing we create by affirming one another through the ordinances. To offer a definition, church membership is a church's affirmation and oversight of a Christian profession of faith and discipleship, combined with a Christian submission to the church and its oversight. It's affirmation and oversight. Until we read through this chapter, I hadn't given that part of church membership a lot of thought. And it makes sense, right? When somebody comes to join the church, we affirm with them that God has worked in their lives. We have a conversation. At First Baptist, you have a conversation with a staff member beforehand, and we talk about your salvation experience and why you want to join the church, and we affirm the decision that God's already made in your life, and you've already made to follow God. And then that also gives us oversight to help you grow as a disciple. That may best play out in picture form. Illustration form is when we do a baby dedication. We don't baptize infants. We don't hold baptism to be have any salvific power. But we a lot of times will dedicate children to the Lord. And as part of that, we agree as a church, right, we're going to help the parents to raise their kids to be spiritual mentors, to walk along beside them in that journey. And the same thing happens when somebody joins our church, right? We give affirmation to what God has done in their life as a new believer in Christ. And then we commit to get oversight to their spiritual journey. There's a commitment on both sides. And the other side of that then, as a new believer, right, as a new church member, you submit to the authority of the church in areas of faith, right? How we live our life, what we're supposed to do, how we grow in our faith. And as the church offers classes to help me grow in my faith, I take those. When I practice my faith, I practice it within the confines of the church. And so there were a lot of discussion this week about baptism and Lord's Supper and their unique way that plays in the affirmation and the oversight of a believer. And I hope you found that challenging. You had to think a little bit. There's some, in your discussion questions, there's some things that pertain to that. And then the final part of that kind of talked about church membership and why is it important? Because, we've all heard people say, well, I'm a believer in Christ. I don't have to come to church. I don't have to be a member of anybody's church. God still loves me. While that's all true, that God still loves you, when we commit ourselves to a local church, then we put ourselves in a group of people who love us, who affirm us, who want to help us grow in our faith, but it also gives us some authority in our lives. Gives us some accountability for our spiritual walk. We're in this together, right? We understand that commitment, that being part of a local church is what helps you grow in your faith and gives you some accountability. I told the illustration in both of the classes, and you may have seen it. A man had gotten out of, a church member had gotten out of the habit of coming to church. And so the pastor went to visit him in his home, and they had a little conversation, and they were sitting by the fireplace. And the guy told the pastor, said, "Look, Pastor, I'm a believer in Christ. I've just gotten out of the habit of coming, but besides, I don't have to come to church to be a believer." So the pastor took the tongs from the fire and went in and grabbed one of those hot burning coals and he set it on the hearth. And it just sat there, and they continued to have a little bit of conversation, but you could see that burning ember began to fade and to cool off and to not be quite as vibrant as it was. And over a period of time, it had all, but you could barely see any semblance of all of that ember was still burning. Before he left, the pastor took the tongs and took that burning ember and put it right back in the middle of the fire, and immediately it began to glow again, and it began to do what it's supposed to do. And on the way out, the man said, "Pastor, I get your point. I'll see you at church on Sunday." It's important for our spiritual journey that we tie ourselves to a local church that we're active in, because it's there that we find affirmation and oversight on our spiritual journey, and we submit ourselves to the authority of the church, who has authority over the who and the what of the gospel to keep us growing as Christians. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the book. We'll see you again next week.